Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we begin Hilchos Machalas Assuros, the second of the three halachas that are in the Sefer Kedushin, the Book of Sanctity, in the Rambam's Yad Chazaka, which are the laws of forbidden foods, which the Rambam says, Yesh B'chlal and Shmeine ve'esr mitzvahs. In these categories of halachas, there are 28 commandments, Abba mitzvahs say 4 positive commandments, Va'arba ve'esr mitzvahs listed, and 24 negative prohibitions. V'zel pratin, and the Rambam says, and these are those specifics. Which Aleph, the first mitzvah is livdik b'simoni b'hem v'chaya, to inspect the signs of the animal and the wild animal, lahavdil ben tmei l'Torah, that distinguishes between it being a kosher or non-kosher animal. Second positive commandment is livdik b'simoni oif, to inspect the signs of a bird, lahavdil ben l'Torah, that differentiates between it being a kosher or non-kosher animal. Gimel is livdik b'simoni chagavim, lahavdil ben l'Torah, to check the signs of the locust, to see if it's differentiating if it's kosher or not kosher. Livdik b'simone dogim lahavdil ben l'Torah, and to check the signs of a fish to differentiate between what's kosher and what's not kosher. Those are the 4 positive commandments. Then you have the negative prohibitions. Hey, the 5th mitzvah, shleilechol b'hem v'chayei tmeya, not to eat any non-kosher domesticated or wild animal. Vav shleilechol ev tamei, not to eat any non-kosher bird. Zayin shleilechol dogim tmeim, not to eat any non-kosher fish. Ches shleilechol sheretz oif, not to eat the teeming birds that fly, that are these types of flies. Test is shleilechol sheretz ha'if, not to eat the things that are teeming, these are types of insects that crawl on the ground. Shleilechol remes ha'aretz, remes are the creeping creatures, which are more like worms and those types of things that are from the ground. Yudalf shleilechol telas ha'perish keshetetz la'aver, not to eat specifically a worm that comes out of a fruit, that once it comes out to the ear space, then it becomes forbidden to be eaten. Yud beish leilechol sheretz hamayim, not to eat the teeming creatures from the water, which are the aquatic types of flies. Yud gimel leilechol nevela, not to eat a animal that died without being properly slaughtered. Yud dal shleilahanis b'shar niskal, not to have any pleasure, any benefit from, and very much so regarding the eating of an ox that is stoned, which if it gored, then it has to be stoned. Tezvav shleilechol treif, not to eat an animal that has a mortal defect, or that was mauled. Tezayin shleilechol ever min hachayim, not to eat a limb from a living creature. Yudayin shleilechol dam, not to eat blood. Yudches shleilechol chelev b'hem ta'ir, not to eat the certain fats in the animal that are called chelev from a kosher animal. It's forbidden to eat those fats. Yutes shleilechol gid hanasha, not to eat the gid hanasha, which is the sciatic nerve that was displaced by Yaakov Avinu. You're not allowed to eat that same gid by an animal. Chav shleilechol basar b'chalav, not to eat a mixture of meat and milk. Chav shleilechol vashli, not to cook meat and milk. Chav beis shleilechol lechem tvur chadasha, not to eat bread from the new grain before that it becomes permitted when one has the karbanis of the oimer that are and the shtei halechem. There are certain times when it permits one's not allowed to eat the new grain before that. That is specifically of bread. Chav gimel shleilechol koli min hachadash, not supposed to eat roasted grain from the new grain. And chavdal shleilechol karmel min hachadash, not to eat the fresh grain from the new grain. Again, before it becomes permitted to eat the new grain. Chafei shleilechol arla, not to eat the fruits of a tree in its first 3 years. Shleilechol kla hakerem, not to eat the fruits that grew up in a forbidden mixture in a vineyard. Chavzayin shleilechol telva, not to eat untithed produce. And chavchas shleilishtos yain nesach, not to drink wine that was poured as libation for avodah zarah. Uber mitzvahs elu progamelu, and the explanation of these mitzvahs are in these chapters, which there are 17 chapters. The first 4 discussed regarding the kashrus of animals, of living creatures. Parak Hey through Tes discusses things that are forbidden from a living creature. Parak Yud discusses the prohibitions of things that sprout. Parak Yud Alf to Gimel discusses the wine of a non-Jew. Parak Yudal discusses in general prohibited things to be eaten. Tezvav Tezayin talks about tarevis, prohibited mixtures. And Parak Yud discusses regarding the vessels of non-Jews and regarding their things that they cook. With that, we begin Parak Rishon, the first parak, which discusses the signs of kashrus, of what is kosher, by a living creature. As Rambam opens up halacha aleph regarding in general the mitzvah of differentiating what's kosher and what's not with the appropriate simanim, with the signs. As Rambam says, mitzvah to say, it's a positive commandment, leida, or like the Maggid Mishneh says, livdik, to check, but it's to know, to check hasimanim shavavdil mehem, with the signs that one could differentiate between a domesticated wild animal, birds, fish, locusts that you're permitted to eat, regarding those creatures from the same species you're not allowed to eat. Like there's a passing of a yikr. It says you should differentiate between the kosher and the not kosher animal, between the kosher and the non-kosher bird. But then, like it says, the pasuk over there earlier in Perek Yud to differentiate between the non-kosher and the kosher, and between the wild animal that is eaten and between the wild animal that is not eaten. Now, Allah Beis Ram continues regarding the simoni specific kashrus of that of a behema and a chaya. As Ram says, simoni behema v'chaya nisporish b'Torah. The signs of kashrus of a behema and a chaya, a wild animal, were specified in the Torah. Those are two distinct signs, which are mafreses parsa split hooves, which are the feet of the animal, have to be split all the way. Umalas geira, and that they chew their cud, which they bring up the cud, they chew it, it comes back down. Until you have these two signs, those are the criterion for being a kosher animal. Now, the Rambam further tells us that any animal, wild animal, that is malas gera, that chews its cud, it does not have teeth in its upper jawbone. Now, moreover, any animal, again, like we said, that chews its cud, we automatically know that it has split hooves, and you wouldn't have to check. The one exception is the camel. Now, why doesn't the Rambam mention also the shafin and the arneves, which the Torah explicitly mentions that they are maligera and they are not mafrise parsa, that they chew the cud and they don't have split hooves, like the Rabbi points out? That's because the Rambam's talking about quote unquote a min tahar. On them is what the Rambam says, that they don't have upper teeth. The shafin and the arneves are quote unquote tameim, because although they're maligera, they chew their cud, but they have teeth on their upper jawbone. In contrast, the young camel is similar to a kosher animal in the sense that it does not have upper teeth on up its jaw, so therefore it's qualifying that as one that, although it's malas gerim, it's not going to be mafreses parsa, it does not have split hooves, but all other ones do, as it's going to be important in the moment to when we don't know exactly what an animal is. And v'chol behemishi mafreses parsa, and again, any animal that has split hooves, he malas gera. We know automatically that it chews its cud. Chutz from the chazir, except for the chazir. So again, generally, it's going to have both. If it has one, it has the other, except chazir is going to have only the one of split hooves not chewing its cud. And the case the Rambam picks, besides the other two, is that if it chews its cud, it's going to have split hooves, except for the camel, and like we said, the shafan and the arneves. Now, lafikach, therefore, since we know these three distinct signs that it chews its cud, it has split hooves, and it doesn't have teeth on its upper jawbone, so let's say someone finds an animal in the desert, doesn't recognize which animal this is. Now generally, so what? So you'll check the hooves and check if it chews its cud. No. He finds it that its foot is cut off, its hoof is cut off, and therefore it's not possible to check if it has split hooves. So what you do is you check by its mouth, and you see if it does not have teeth on the top by its upper jawbone, then you know that it's a kosher animal, because if it doesn't have teeth in its upper jawbone, then we said we already know for sure that it chews its cud, as we said in Lacha Beis. If it chews its cud, we said we already know that it has split hooves, as we said, so therefore it has the two signs. Now, but there's one caveat, sheyako gamal, that person has to recognize at least what is a camel, because a young camel does not have teeth on its upper jawbone. So the fact that it doesn't have teeth wouldn't clearly define it. So only if he knows that it's not a camel, then he knows for sure it's a kosher animal. Another case, let's say let's say he finds an animal that its mouth is cut off. You can't recognize, in other words, if it has teeth on its upper jawbone or not, because its whole mouth is messed up. So but said, then you check its hooves. If it's completely split, then it's going to be kosher, because if it has split hooves, we said it also chooses cut, like we said in the previous halacha. But here also you have to know the other way, sheyakar chazir. You have to know the swine, because the chazir has split hooves, even though it doesn't chew its cud. So it wouldn't be a kosher animal. But as long as you know it's not a chazir, then you know it's a kosher animal. Now let's say let's say you find its mouth is cut off, and its legs are cut off. So therefore you can't check not in its mouth, not in its feet, and it's not easy to tell if an animal chews its cud or not. So what are you going to do? So by dikba, you could check it some other way. After you slaughter it, check by the end of the tail. If you see that the flesh over there goes crisscross, goes in the length and the width, then tahira, then it's going to be a kosher animal. But v'hu here also, as long as sheyako orad, as long as you recognize that it's not a wild donkey, shekinhu b'sar shasiv erev, because there its flesh also goes crisscross. Generally, it's going to go one way and not the other way. By kosher animal goes in either direction, the flesh, by that area behind the tail. So therefore, if it has shasiv erev and you know it's not the wild donkey, then it's going to be a kosher animal too. Halacha dal, behemoth ta'ira sheyoldikim in behemoth tameh. What happens if a kosher animal gives birth to something that looks like a not kosher, unkosher animal? Now, so although this creature does not have split hooves, does not chew its cud, it's like a horse or donkey for all practical purposes, it's still going to be kosher to eat because it's coming from a kosher animal. Now, when do we say this? When it gives birth in front of us, so we know that it came from the kosher animal. But let's say you left a pregnant cow in your flock. And you come later on, you see that there's like a swine that's bound up with this, the cow that had given birth. And even though this, so to speak, chazir is nursing from this cow, so it looks like it's from the cow and it should be kosher. Now, here's the suffix. It's still a situation of doubt. It's going to be forbidden to eat this swine-looking creature. Maybe it was really born from another swine, from a non-kosher animal, and it just somehow got connected to this kosher cow, but really it wasn't from this cow, and therefore, out of doubt, it's going to be forbidden to be eaten. Halacha hey. What's if a non-kosher animal gives birth to something that's like a kosher animal? So here, although this creature chews its cud and has split hooves, and it's like a full bracket purpose, it looks like an ox, it looks like a sheep. It's forbidden to be eaten, and the reason for this is which is grown, which is produced from a non-kosher animal, is not kosher. When a Torah comes from a kosher animal, it's Torah to be kosher. Therefore, since it depends on what produces it, not which body it's found in, so dog tamei shenim to be made dog tar. So if you found a non-kosher fish in the belly of a kosher fish, it's can be forbidden. If it's dog tar, hanim to be made dog tamei. If you find a kosher fish in the belly of a non-kosher fish, it's can be permitted. The fish ain't gedula because it's not what produced it. It's obviously swallowed it up, and therefore it's going to be depending on what produced it and not in which animal you find it. Halacha vav. Be'emet tarish yalda. A kosher animal that gives birth, or you find inside of it, birya, creature that has two backs, and two spines. This creature is going to be forbidden to be eaten. Why? Because it's the shasur that's mentioned in the Torah, like it says in the Devar. Says Torah, this should not be eaten from those that chew its cud and have split hooves, which is hashasua. It's a birya, it's a creature, that's born divided into two different animals. And it's like divided because it has like two backs and two spines, and therefore that's a custom that although it's coming from a kosher animal, it's going to be forbidden. Halacha zayin. So too, what's problematic if you have an animal that you find inside of it something like has the form of a bird. Even though it's a kosher bird, it's forbidden to be eaten, even though it's a kosher animal. Because it's not permitted what you find inside a kosher animal, only that which at least has hooves. But if it doesn't have hooves, it's like a bird, so then it's not going to be kosher. Halacha ches, the Rambam continues in differentiating further between that of a behema and a chaya. As Rambam says, you don't have in any domesticated or wild animal in the world, except for the 10 species that I mentioned in the Torah. So the Torah tells you which type of behema v'chayas are permitted to be eaten. Shleish amina behema. There are 3 types of domesticated animals. Behema, they are shar, an ox, seh, sheep, ve'ez, and goat. V'shivim min chaya, and 7 types of wild animals. You have ayil, the gazelle, utzvi, the deer, v'yachmur, the antelope, v'akoy, the ibex, v'dishan, and the shemi, v'soy, and the bison, the v'zomer, and the giraffe, which these definitions are debatable exactly what these creatures are. These are as some translate them. And Haimim name, it's not only them, but it's also their species, their subcategories. For example, Shahabar, the wild ox, the Hamri, and the buffalo, Shahim Minasher, which is from the species of that of an ox. And Machalasar Minamunei, and all these 10 species and their species, their subcategories, are all Malagir Mafres Paras, they're all true, they cut and they have split hooves. Lafikach, therefore, Mishumaki, whoever recognizes them. And it's Sarach, you don't have to check that cow, Libepeb, Liberglaim, not in the mouth, not in the feet, because you know this is from those kosher species. Now, halacha test. Although all of them are permitted to be eaten, we have to differentiate between what's a kosher behema and what's a kosher chaya. Why? Aren't they all kosher? 3 of those types and 7 of those? No. Shachaya difference is because a wild animal chel b'mutter. The chayla, which are certain types of fats, are permitted in the wild animal to be eaten. The damator kisur, and its blood, like that of a bird, needs to be covered when you slaughter it. Whereas behema hatayr, the kosher domesticated animal, chel b'bakaris, if you eat its chayla, there's a punishment of karis, of dying young. Then damator kisur, and there the blood actually does not need to be covered. So you still have to know which one's behema and which one is a chay. Now halacha yud. B'simani chayim and piashmuhim. The signs of what's a kosher wild animal are from tradition. That komen shu mafres parsa, whatever has split hooves, umalagir chooses cud, the yeshli karnayim, and it has horns that are mefutzalis, that branch off, kagoin ha'ai, like a gazelle. Harizachai tar bavad is most definitely a kosher wild animal. Now, v'choshe in karn of mefutzalis, and if the horns don't branch off, so imhoyu karn of kuruches. So if the horns were curved, kikarni ashar, like the horns of an ox, v'charukes, and notched, kikarni es, like the horns of a goat. And moreover, it has to be that the notches are embedded in the horns. And third of all, the haduris, and they're spiraled. Kikarna like the horns of a deer. That will also be a sign that it's a kosher wild animal. As we said, as long as those 3 criteria in the horns, these signs are kruches, curved, charukes, notch, baduris, and spiral. Now, halachiyat aleph, but remember when we say this, the minshe in the makira, only species that you don't recognize. So you can define it with these simanim. But regarding the 7 wild animals that mentioned explicitly in the Torah that we mentioned before in Halacha Ches, so if he recognizes that that's that animal, even if he doesn't find it having horns, he can eat its fats. He would have to cover its blood because again he knows that this is a chaya, not a behemoth. Like we said, we know what's considered the 7 types of kosher chayas. But the question is this a chai, is this a behema? And that you have to know, like we said, regarding the chaylev and the dam, so that we said that what's considered a wild animal and not a behema are regarding those signs of, it has the 2 kosher signs, and additionally it has that of the horns to be considered as a chaya that's tahir. Halachid beis, shahar bar, the wild ox, says the Rambam, min behema, that's a type of, although it's wild, but it's a type of a behema, like in the category of shar. Now, v'hakerish, in contrast, the unicorn, although it only has 1 horn, and generally the kosher chayas we said have 2 horns, but still, this hareyu chaya, this is considered a wild animal. And it says, what happens if you're in doubt? You don't know, is it a kosher wild animal or a kosher behemoth, domesticated animal? So then, out of doubt, chel be'asr, the fats are going to be forbidden because maybe it's a type of a behemoth. But you don't get lashes because maybe it's type of chaya and you don't get lashes out of doubt. And you also cover the blood out of doubt, then maybe it's a chaya. Halacha Yud Gimel. What happens if you have a mixture, a mixed breed from a kosher behema together that with a kosher chaya? So actually, huanikr koi, that's what's called koi, and chel by aser, its fats are aser like that of a behema. But you don't get lash on it. And we cover its blood, like we said, because of the combination of the behema and the chaya. And the ein min tamim is abed min tar klal. So, but regarding mixtures, so you can have with a behema and the chaya that's kosher, but you can't have that a non-kosher animal could become impregnated from a kosher animal, and in reverse. So you're never going to have that question regarding kosher and not kosher mixed breed. Now, now we continue regarding the signs of kashrus by a bird. Simani oif tahar lo nisparsh min Torah. So actually, the signs of what's considered a kosher bird were not specified in the Torah. The only thing the Torah does, it tells you which are considered the non-kosher species of birds. And all the other types of birds in the world are permitted. Now, the types that are forbidden are 24. And they are, again here also the interpretations are debatable, at least for some of them. Aleph is Nesher, is the eagle. Paris is the asifrej. Gimel is Nia, is the osprey. Da is kite, v'hi, and says the Ram hara hamur Mishneh, although there's a different word mentioned in the Sefer Devarim, the ra'ah, it's actually the same one as this da'a. Hey, Aya is the vulture. That's also the Daya that's mentioned, although it's a different word. It's the same species that's mentioned in Sefer Devarim, just a different name for it. Vav is Minha Aya, a type of vulture, because Shekein Kasaba Limina. It says, when they mention the vulture, it says, and it for its species, Machlosh Shnei Min. Obviously, there's another type of subspecies in that of the vulture. Zayin is Oiv is the raven, Ches is Zarzer is the starling, Shekein Nema Ba'oiv Limina, because by the raven it says for its species, Lahaves Zarzer, which comes to include something which is similar to that, which is the starling. Tes Yan is the ostrich, Yud Tachmas is the owl, Yud Av Shachaf is the gull, Yud Beis is Nates is the hawk, Yud Gimel is Visharanka is the goshawk, Vuhu Mina Nates, it's a type of a hawk, Shekein Kasab again, because by the hawk it says for its cat, for its species, including another type. Kais is the falcon, Tezvav is Shalach is the cormorant, Tezayin is Yanshuf is the ibis, Yudzayin Techemis is the swan, Yudches Kos is the pelican, Yudtes Rechama is the magpie, Chav Chasida is the stork, Chav Alf Hanafa is the heron, Chav Beis is Min Hanafa, a type of a heron, Shekin Nemer Balamina, because it says for its species. Hagimel Haduchifas is the hoopie, or it's the wild turkey, Chav Dal is Atalif is the bat. These are the 24 types of birds of Mesothera that are not kosher, and all the rest in the world are kosher. Now, says Ram Halacha Tzvav. Whoever is proficient in these species and in their names, and to be able to know the species, what exactly, and how to define them, so you can eat any bird that's not from these 24. You don't have to check it because you know it's not from one of these 24. Now, however, a kosher bird is eaten with tradition. Meaning to say, what was handed down from father to son, from Rebbe to Talmud, to know that this is a kosher bird. V'hu, and that is, Shiyid of a Pashid, V'isamakim, Shezal Ivtar. But it has to be that it's known, very well known, that this is that kosher bird. And more of a Venemet Sa'id Leimer, a hunter is believed to say, Oivzeh Hitali Rebbe outside. This bird, my teacher, permitted me, who he was a hunter, that he told me that this is a kosher species. But that is but as long as we know, we have a presumption that that hunter who taught him, that he was proficient in these species and the names, then you could go and rely on what he had said. Now, anyone that does not recognize them, or even if we know them, but we don't recognize what the names are of which animal, which bird is what, so then what you do is you check in these signs that the sages, the Torah doesn't say, but the sages gave us the signs, and that is kol eifshu dairis va'eichel. Any bird that pounces and eats, meaning it puts its hand on the prey that it's eating, and only then does it eat from it. Then you know it's from one of these 24 types of species, and that's a not kosher bird. Now, but if it does not pounce and eat, doesn't hold on to the thing and then eat, if has one of these three signs that we're going to mention, it's considered a kosher bird. What are these three? Etzba Yisera has an extra finger, meaning an extra claw. This that we call it the extra. It's a finger that's higher. It's further back than the rest of the fingers. So although most birds have it, it's called Yisera because it's not in the same order as the other claws. Or others say the reason why it's called Yisera means bigger. It's bigger than the other claws. So that's one sign. Zefik, or if it has the crop, which is a type of a pouch inside the animal, which before it gets to the kurkavan, it's where the food gathers over there. It's like similar to what a stomach is by a human being. And Hamura, this is what's known in the Torah and Vayikra, V'hisas Murasai, by the bird kavanah had to take out, that's the crop. Or the third sign is, if it's craw, which is another one of the intestines of the bird, is niklav biyad, if the pouch that's inside can be peeled by hand. If it has any one of those three signs, then you know it's a kosher bird. Now, halach yidzai, says the Rambam, lafisha in b'chalela min masur min she'in adoris. Now, since you don't have any one of those 24 species we mentioned in the non-kosher species, that is a min she'in adoris, that it's a type that A, it doesn't pounce, and that it has one of these three signs, that's why we're saying that if it's not a doiris and has one of these three signs, it's going to be considered kosher, because none of those 24 minim are not doiris and has one of these three signs. Now, chutz mi peres vaznia, actually two of the 24, the peres and znia, they actually are not doiris and they have one of these three signs, but Uperes baznia ein mitzum b'yishuv. Those two types of birds are not found in settled areas. They're actually in the deserts of the faraway islands overseas. Shein Sefer Yishuv, which is the end of the settled area of the world. And since they're not so common, we don't have to suspect that it's those two birds, those two species, and therefore, again, if it's not a dairis, and it's one of these three signs, you could presume that it's a kosher bird. Now, let's say what happens if the kurkavan, the craw, could be peeled with a knife, but not by hand. If the emes menacher, and it doesn't have any one of the other signs, because if it did have, then it would automatically be a kosher bird. Like we said, it has to have only one of the three. So ava pishe in a daris, although it's not daris, again, because if it was daris, automatically would be a non-kosher bird. But, so, even though it's not daris, and you could peel it, but only with a knife, how is it something? That's already doubt. We don't know if that would be considered that it's kosher or not. Now, let's say how you chazik b'davik. Let's say it was firm and tightly attached. V'hinich b'shemesh, but it was put into the sun. V'nisrapa, and then it got soft. Now you could peel it by hand. Here's a mutter. Then it's going to be already permitted, and it's going to be a sign that it's a kosher bird. Now, halacha test. Amar Gagoin Hagoin. The Gagoin said, "Shemesoyasi b'yadayim," that it's a tradition that they have in their hands. She'ein morin lahater oifa baba semenecha. We don't rule to permit a bird that comes with one kosher sign. Elem haya oisa siman shekov kukaban b'yad. The one of the three that we will rely on is if the craw could be peeled, that pouch that's inside could be peeled by hand. But if you cannot peel the craw by hand, even though it has one of the other two signs, has the crop or has the extra finger, the extra claw from behind, they wouldn't rely and permit it based on that sign. Now, any bird that splits its claws, its feet, when you spread out a string for it, two claws going one way and two claws going the other way, or it catches objects in the ear and it's going to eat it in the ear space. That's obviously a bird of prey, and it's considered one of the non-kosher animals. And any bird that dwells with the non-kosher birds and it seems similar to them, we also consider that as the non-kosher species. Now, Rambam moves on to the locust. And the types of locusts that the Torah permitted are 8, and they are chagav, the white locust, and Beis is min chagav, the type of white locust, and that is harasbanis. Gimel you have chargel, which is the spotted gray locust. Umin chargel, dalid is umin chargel, another type similar to the spotted gray one. Who are tzuvya. Hey is arba, is the red locust, and vav umin arba, and that which is similar to that one. Vahu tziparis karam, that's what's known as the bird of the vineyard. Zayin salam is the yellow locust, ches umin salam, and a species that's similar to that of the yellow locust. V'hi yechana yerushalmi. Those are the 8 types of kosher locusts. Now, halacha basis Rambam mishu b'akabem mishmei. Whoever's proficient in them and locusts and what their names are, then oichli could eat it. But and also here the hunter is trusted regarding them. Kaif, like we said regarding the bird, that we rely on the hunter in halacha tezvav. Now, but a misha in the Bakavin, someone's not proficient knowing what type of locust is what and what the names are. So then he checks for the signs. There are 3 types of signs for kosher locust. If it has 4 feet, and it has 4 wings that cover the majority of the length of the body and the majority of the circumference of the width of its body. And it has 2 longer legs that it hops and jumps with. If it has those 3 signs, that's considered kosher species. Now, even so, where all the 8 species that we said that are considered the kosher locust, they don't have elongated heads and they don't have a tail, but here, even so, as long as it has these 3 signs that we mentioned, even though that it's Shareshi Aruch, it has an elongated head and has a tail, if its name was Chagav, then again it's going to be kosher because of the fact that it's called Chagav, which is one of the 8 types that are kosher. Now, halacha of Gimel. Now, if you have a locust that does not have right now wings, or the longer legs to jump with, or even if it has wings but doesn't have wings that covers the majority of its body, but it's going to end up growing them after when it matures. It's going to have those simanim. It just doesn't have it yet. So right away now it's already permitted because it doesn't have to actually have it. It's just a siman, and since ultimately going to have it, it's from those 3 signs which say that it's kosher. And like we said, and even if it's elongated head and it has a tail, which is not from one of those 8, but if it's called chagav, then it's going to be kosher. Now, Allah Chavdal, the Rambam finishes off with that of the signs of a kosher fish. It says Rambam, regarding fish, there's two signs for it to be considered kosher: snapper, fins, because kesses and scales. Now, usnapper, what are a snapper? Who shepereach, boy, this is what it swims with the fins. Because kesses, what are scales? Here, the book of B'chol Guvit, it's what attached to its whole body. Now, v'chol sheyeshlei kesses, if the fish has scales, you know yeshlei snapper that it has fins. Now, ainlei achshav ukshiyagdel yiloi. Now, even though it doesn't have it right now, but ultimately when it becomes bigger, it's going to have it. Or even though it just has scales when it's in the sea. But when you take it out of the sea, it shakes off all its scales and it doesn't have it when it comes onto land. It's going to be permitted because ultimately it is a type that has the scales. Now, even if it doesn't have scales that covers the whole body, mutter is going to be permitted. And even if it has only one fin and one scale, it's going to be permitted as long as it has one fin, one scale. And again, even if it just has scales, you know automatically it has fins. So if it just has a scale, one scale, that's really going to be considered as a kosher fish.